The HOA of Maple Ridge thought they could bully Ethan Cole into submission. To them, he was just another homeowner, quiet, working class, and easy to control. But when they fined him for parking his red pickup truck in his own driveway, they crossed a line they didn't even see. That truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was a symbol of the years Ethan had spent building his life from the ground up. They mocked him in meetings, mailed fines like threats, and called him non-compliant. What they didn't know was that Ethan was an engineer who read property laws for fun, and soon, the street they ruled over would legally belong to him. Ethan Cole had lived in Maple Ridge for 4 quiet years before the trouble started. His home sat on a cul-de-sac lined with neatly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and people who waved with one hand while clutching judgment in the other. For years, he kept to himself, mowing his lawn every weekend, paying dues on time, and never speaking up in HOA meetings. The board liked quiet people. Quiet people didn't resist. That changed the day Ethan bought his truck. It wasn't a monster vehicle or anything flashy. Just a deep red Ford F-250 he'd restored himself, a symbol of his independence and the years he'd spent working as a civil engineer. It reminded him of long projects, dirt roads, and hard work. The first morning he parked it in his driveway. Sunlight gleamed off the polished hood like a badge of pride. But by noon, the letter arrived. Notice of violation. Section 14B, unauthorized vehicle type in driveway. The HOA's logo was printed in gold at the top like some royal decree. The message was short and sharp. Trucks, commercial vehicles, and work-related equipment are not permitted to be visible from the street. Remove immediately or face daily fines. Ethan read it twice, then laughed. He wasn't running a business. He wasn't parking a tow truck or a dump trailer. It was his personal vehicle, licensed, insured, and perfectly clean. He shrugged it off, figuring it was a clerical mistake. 2 days later, a second letter came, hand-delivered this time. Karen Walker, the HOA president, stood at his doorstep, a clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. Her lips were pursed so tight they looked like they might disappear. "Mr. Cole, you've been notified about your non-compliant vehicle," she said. "If it's not removed, the board will begin assessing fines." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, calm. "It's my personal truck. It's not commercial. I use it for groceries, not construction." Karen's tone turned icy. "The HOA rules don't differentiate. Trucks of that size are prohibited from driveways. You may park it inside your garage." He gestured toward his one-car garage. "There's barely room for a bicycle, let alone that truck. And I'm not redesigning my house because someone doesn't like what I drive." Karen tilted her head, a smile creeping across her face. The kind people wear when they think they've already won. "Then I suppose we'll be seeing you at the next compliance meeting." By the end of the week, Ethan had received 3 more notices. Each one grew bolder, filled with threats of escalating fines and legal action. His neighbors started whispering. Some supported him quietly. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to anger the board. The HOA had a way of turning communities into silent battlegrounds. One morning, Ethan woke to find a bright orange sticker plastered on his mailbox. Final notice. It was meant to humiliate him, to make an example out of the man who dared park his truck like a rebel. That was when Ethan decided to stop laughing. He started attending HOA meetings. At first, Karen and the board acted surprised to see him. The room was filled with the usual faces, retirees with wine glasses, neighbors pretending to care about landscaping budgets, and the same smug leadership who treated the HOA like their personal kingdom. When Ethan spoke up and read, aloud the line from the HOA bylaws that said commercial vehicles were prohibited, not personal ones, Karen interrupted. "You're misinterpreting the intent of that rule." "Mr. Cole," she snapped. "I'm reading it word for word," Ethan replied evenly. "Intent doesn't override written law." The room went quiet. A few people nodded. Others frowned. Karen shifted in her chair. "If you want to dispute the fines, you can submit an appeal to the compliance committee." He smiled faintly. "I already have, and I'll keep appealing until you realize I'm not the kind of man you can push around." When the meeting adjourned, Karen glared at him across the table. That look told him everything. This wasn't about a truck anymore. This was about control, and she wasn't used to losing it. Ethan left the meeting calm, but something inside him had shifted. The HOA had started a war, and he intended to end it with paperwork, persistence, and a plan they'd never see coming. The next morning, Ethan found a crisp white envelope taped to his door. Inside was a fine, $100 per day, retroactive to the date of the first notice. It had only been a week, but the HOA claimed he already owed $700. He chuckled, shaking his head. They really don't know who they're dealing with. That evening, he walked his neighborhood as usual. The air was warm, the lawns trimmed to regulation perfection. But as he passed each home, he noticed small hypocrisies: boats tucked behind fences, campers half hidden by hedges, driveways with oil stains. All violations if the HOA bothered to notice. Karen didn't bother. She only noticed him. At the corner house, his neighbor Dave, an older man who spent his retirement fixing motorcycles, waved him over. "You're the talk of the street, Ethan. Karen's got everyone on edge again." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Over my truck?" "Not just that. She's been pushing new restrictions. Wants to fine anyone whose trash cans stay out more than 15 minutes after pickup." Dave sighed. "She's power-hungry, man." "Always been that way?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "You ever tried standing up to her?" Dave snorted. "I like my peace and quiet, but you? You've got the fire for it." That night, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, letters and bylaws spread across the surface like battle plans. Every fine, every citation, it all violated basic property law. The HOA was operating beyond its authority, and Karen was weaponizing it for control. He decided to fight back the right way: paperwork. He began documenting everything: every letter, every notice, every conversation. He even installed a camera facing his driveway. Within days, he had footage of Karen and another board member taking photos of his truck without notice, and even walking onto his property. Then came the courtesy inspection. 2 members of the HOA arrived unannounced, clipboards in hand, demanding access to inspect his backyard for potential violations. Ethan met them at the gate and smiled politely. "You can inspect from the sidewalk," he said. "Anything beyond that is trespassing." They didn't like that answer. One of them muttered something about non-compliance. The next morning, another fine appeared, this time for failure to cooperate with HOA inspection. The total had ballooned to nearly $2,000. Ethan called Karen directly. "Karen, we need to talk." Her tone was dripping with satisfaction. "About your ongoing non-compliance?" "About your overreach," he said calmly. "You're issuing unlawful fines, ignoring your own bylaws, and intimidating homeowners." "I'm enforcing community standards," she said coolly. "If you don't like them, you're free to move." He grinned, though she couldn't see it. "Oh, I'm not moving." "I'm documenting." There was a pause. "Documenting what?" "Your mistakes." He hung up before she could answer. That was the night Ethan's anger turned into strategy. He started digging deeper, pulling the HOA's registration papers, financial statements, and land plat maps from public records. What he discovered made his pulse quicken. The HOA didn't actually own the roads. The entire street, curbs, sidewalks, even the driveways, was under a municipal lease, with the city retaining full ownership. The HOA only managed aesthetic enforcement, which meant all their parking restrictions were legally unenforceable. It was a loophole, but a powerful one. Ethan could file for a right-of-way permit directly with the city and gain control over his own driveway access, completely outside HOA jurisdiction. But Ethan didn't stop there. If the HOA wanted to weaponize paperwork, he'd use it as a sword instead of a shield. He contacted a property lawyer, explained everything, and together they developed a plan that would turn Karen's control games upside down. It started small: a few filings, a title inquiry, and a letter to the county clerk's office. Within a week, Karen noticed something was different. The fines stopped appearing. She started showing up at meetings more defensive, more nervous. Ethan could see it in her eyes. The moment when a bully realizes her target. Might be smarter than she thought, but the real blow was yet to come. When Ethan's request with the city came through, an application to purchase public Right-of-way property along his block. The clerk called to confirm the details. It was a long process, but doable. And once approved, the HOA would no longer have any authority over that stretch of street. Ethan smiled. Yes, go ahead with the application. I'll cover all costs personally. That night, he stood in his driveway staring at his red truck gleaming under the streetlight. For weeks, Karen had treated him like a nuisance, an eyesore to be erased. But soon she'd realized she wasn't just fighting a stubborn homeowner. She was fighting the man who was about to buy the ground beneath her rules. For the next 2 weeks, Ethan worked quietly, almost invisibly. He stopped arguing, stopped replying to HOA letters. Karen, mistaking his silence for surrender, relaxed her guard. Behind the scenes, however, Ethan's plan was taking shape, one form, one notarized signature at a time. Through the city's property management office, he discovered that the street in front of his home, Brookview Lane, was technically listed as public right-of-way, available for conditional ownership if a private party assumed all maintenance costs. Most people wouldn't dare take that responsibility, but to Ethan, it was the perfect pressure point. He filed a formal petition to purchase the entire section of roadway that stretched in front of his house and the 4 homes around it, Karen's included. He backed it up with a maintenance plan, insurance proof, and personal funds. The city clerk, surprised but amused, said, "Never had anyone request something like this before." Ethan grinned. There's a first time for everything. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. New letters arrived. Fines for unapproved exterior fixtures, unsightly vehicles, and even inappropriate holiday lighting, though it wasn't even December. Each notice came with her elegant signature in blue ink, each dripping with authority she didn't really have. Then came the HOA meeting. Ethan made sure to attend. The room buzzed with polite smiles and tension. Folding chairs lined the community center, a table of pastries sat untouched, and Karen stood at the front, clipboard clutched like a scepter. Ethan arrived 5 minutes late, deliberately drawing eyes. She spotted him instantly. "Mr. Grant?" she said coolly. "Glad you decided to join us. We were just discussing ongoing community compliance issues." He smiled and took a seat. "By all means, continue," Karen's voice carried across the room, perfectly rehearsed. "We've had continued issues with non-compliant vehicles parked in plain sight, in violation of Section 14B of our guidelines. Some residents, unfortunately, seem to think the rules don't apply to them." She didn't have to name him. Everyone's eyes did it for her. Ethan waited until she finished before raising his hand. "Karen, quick question. Do you know who owns the streets in Brookview Estates?" The room fell silent. Karen blinked. "The HOA, of course," Ethan smirked. "Incorrect. The city does." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's cheeks reddened. "That's not true. The HOA maintains, yes. Owns, no." He pulled out a folder and dropped a few documents on the table. Public record. County database. Turns out the HOA never formally purchased the land. You're managing property that technically isn't yours. Karen's smile faltered. "What are you getting at?" "I'm saying," Ethan leaned forward, voice calm but sharp, "you're issuing fines on property you don't own. That's called overreach, and you might want to check your liability insurance because it won't cover unauthorized governance." A few homeowners exchanged wide-eyed looks. Dave, sitting near the back, nearly choked on his coffee. Karen stammered. You don't understand how this works." "I understand perfectly." Ethan's eyes didn't leave hers. "And the city will too, because I just filed a petition to purchase Brookview Lane outright." The room exploded in whispers. Karen froze, her lips parting in disbelief. You can't do that." "I already did." For the first time, her confidence cracked. "You wouldn't dare." Ethan smiled faintly. "Try me." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and left the meeting without another word. Behind him, the sound of chaos echoed. Voices arguing, papers rustling, Karen calling after him in frustration. That night, sitting on his porch, Ethan watched the streetlights glow over the quiet lane. He'd lit a fuse and he knew it. But he didn't mind waiting for the explosion. 2 weeks later, it arrived in a certified letter from City Hall. Your petition for private ownership of Brookview Lane has been conditionally approved, pending council review. Please provide proof of financial capability and maintenance commitment within 14 days. Ethan smiled so wide it hurt. He immediately transferred funds from his savings and had the paperwork notarized the same day. By the following week, he officially owned the entire section of road in front of his house, and, ironically, the HOA's power vanished overnight. And as soon as he held that deed in his hands, Ethan knew exactly what to do next. The HOA had charged him rent for parking his truck. Now it was his turn to make them pay rent for driving on his street. The following morning, Ethan's phone buzzed nonstop. Neighbors were calling, texting, and whispering. News of his road ownership had spread like wildfire. By noon, the HOA board held an emergency meeting, but the panic was obvious. Karen's confident tone had been replaced by short, sharp bursts of frustration. Ethan didn't attend that meeting. He didn't need to. Instead, he spent the afternoon on the curb, watching a city crew replace the street sign, private property, access by permission only. The bold black letters gleamed in the sunlight. Beneath it, a smaller line read, Owner E. Grant. Dave walked up, hands in his pockets, grinning. You really went and did it, huh? Ethan chuckled. Guess I did. Dave shook his head. Karen's losing her mind. She told everyone you're holding the neighborhood hostage. Hostage? Ethan laughed. That's rich, coming from her. But Karen wasn't just angry, she was desperate. That evening, a notice appeared on Ethan's mailbox, sealed with the HOA's emblem. It was an official cease and desist letter claiming his ownership of the street-violated community agreements. Ethan scanned it, then tossed it on his counter with a smirk. You can't cease or desist something you never owned. By the end of the week, things escalated fast. Karen began organizing community patrols. HOA members in reflective vests walked up and down the block, muttering to each other, glaring at Ethan whenever he drove by in his red pickup. One evening, they even blocked his driveway, claiming to be monitoring unauthorized traffic. Ethan stepped out of his truck calmly, phone in hand. You do realize this is my road now, right? Which means you're trespassing. One of the men hesitated. We're just doing our duty. Ethan pointed to the new sign. Your duty just ended at that curb. You might want to back up before I call the police. They left, muttering, their bright vests fading into the distance. By now, most of the neighborhood had split into two camps, those who admired Ethan for standing up to the HOA, and those too afraid to admit Karen's reign had gone too far. And Karen? She doubled down harder than ever. The next week, she called a meeting with city representatives, trying to challenge Ethan's purchase. This is an abuse of loopholes, she shouted during the recorded session. He's creating a hostile environment for homeowners. The city clerk remained neutral. Mrs. Halbrook, Mr. Grant followed every step of the legal process. The property sale is valid. Karen's voice cracked. He can't just own the street. The clerk raised an eyebrow. He can, and he does. Karen's face turned red as cameras flashed around her. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled. That video went viral on the neighborhood's online forum within hours. Comments poured in, some supportive, others mocking. Finally, someone stood up to the HOA. One user wrote, Guess Karen met her match, another said. Ethan didn't post or brag. He just kept working quietly. Then came his masterpiece. He drafted formal letters, calm, professional, legally precise, and sent them to every household on his newly purchased stretch of road, including Karen's. Subject: right-of-way access and maintenance fee. Notice as the private owner of Brookview Lane, Sections 4A, 4E, I am responsible for its upkeep and liability, effective immediately. Residents using this section are required to contribute a maintenance fee of $25 per month per household. Payment will cover lighting, snow removal, and general wear. Failure to comply may result in restricted vehicle access. He mailed each letter certified. Within 2 days, Karen stormed to his door, waving her copy like a weapon. You can't charge us rent to use our own street, she hissed. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, calm as ever. It's my street now. You made me pay for parking on it. Fair's fair. Her jaw tightened. You're insane. Maybe, he said. But I'm also legal. She tore up the letter in his face and stomped off, nearly tripping on the curb. By the end of that week, most of the neighbors paid. They didn't like Karen, and they'd seen how Ethan had handled everything by the book. To them, it was easier to contribute a few dollars than to deal with her endless drama. Karen, though, refused. She vowed never to pay a cent of extortion. But when she started receiving notices for delinquent access, fees, she realized she was now living under the same bureaucracy she once weaponized. The irony was delicious, and Ethan savored every second of it. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. For her, power wasn't just about control, it was identity. Losing authority over Ethan, over the street, over anything, ate at her like rust on steel. By Monday morning, she had already begun her counterstrike. The first move came disguised as bureaucracy. Ethan received an official-looking envelope from the Brookview Homeowners Compliance Committee. Inside was a formal petition to revoke the private ownership of Brookview Lane on the grounds of community disruption. Ethan laughed aloud at his kitchen counter. Community disruption? That's rich. But as he read further, his smile faded slightly. Karen had collected 35 signatures, some real, some suspiciously identical, to pressure the city council into reopening the case. She even attached a statement claiming his actions endangered emergency access and pedestrian safety. It was absurd, but it was clever. Karen wasn't trying to win legally. She was trying to turn public sentiment against him. Ethan knew he had to move carefully. That evening, he attended another HOA meeting, this time not as a member but as a spectator. The room was buzzing. People were whispering, staring at him like he was both villain and hero. Karen stood near the podium, her expression the practiced calm of someone pretending to be in charge. Thank you all for coming, she said sweetly. I'd like to address recent concerns about one resident's unusual acquisition of community property. She paused dramatically, eyes darting toward Ethan. Our neighborhood thrives on unity and shared responsibility, she continued. But lately, certain individuals have chosen to act selfishly, undermining the integrity of our community. A few heads nodded. Others frowned. Ethan stood up. You mean people who follow the law? Karen's smile twitched. People who disrupt harmony. The only harmony that existed, Ethan said calmly, was the one you dictated. You fined single mothers for missing a paint deadline, forced retirees to replace fences that didn't need fixing, and called police on a teenager for parking her car too close to a hydrant. Murmurs rose again. Karen shot back. Those are lies! Ethan pulled out a folder. Public records, Karen. Every one of those complaints has your signature on it. Her voice broke slightly. You're trying to humiliate me. No, he said, locking eyes with her. You did that to yourself. A few neighbors actually clapped. That's when Karen lost control. You think owning one street makes you untouchable? You're just a bully with a deed, he smirked. Funny, that's what people used to say about you. Her face turned crimson. She grabbed her notes, muttering something about legal action, and stormed out. The next day, Ethan discovered she'd gone to the local news. A reporter from Channel 6 showed up on his doorstep with a cameraman, asking questions about the homeowner who bought his own street. Karen's side of the story painted him as a petty tyrant exploiting loopholes. Ethan, to his credit, handled it with ease. He invited them in, offered coffee, and calmly showed every document. His deed, his maintenance plan, the city approval letters. I didn't break the rules, he told the reporter. I followed them. The HOA just didn't like that someone else finally understood how their power really worked. That night, when the segment aired, it didn't go the way Karen expected. Viewers overwhelmingly sided with Ethan. Comments flooded in. Finally, a homeowner who beat the HOA at their own game. That guy's my new hero. Karen needs to chill. Even the city council received emails praising Ethan for standing up against overreach. The next morning, his mailbox was full, not of fines, but of thank you letters from neighbors on other streets who were dealing with similar HOA harassment. Dave stopped by, laughing. You've got fan mail, man, Ethan grinned. Guess I'm the accidental face of suburban rebellion. But Karen wasn't finished yet. Late that night, Ethan caught the faint sound of gravel crunching outside. He peeked through his blinds and spotted her car parked across from his driveway. Karen stood there under the streetlight, arms crossed, staring at the new sign that declared his ownership. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she pulled out her phone, snapped a photo, and drove off. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing this wasn't over. She wasn't going to let it die quietly. The next strike wouldn't come from a clipboard or a petition. It would come from something darker, something personal, and he'd be ready for it. For a few weeks, peace held. The street looked the same, the houses stood still, but beneath that calm veneer, a quiet storm brewed. Karen had gone silent, a dangerous kind of silence that didn't mean surrender. Ethan could feel it. One morning, while loading tools into his truck, he noticed something odd. The private property sign at the end of the street was gone. In its place, someone had planted a new one, public access, maintained by Brookview HOA. Ethan frowned, walked closer, and found the metal post still warm from a recent drill. Fresh tire tracks led toward Karen's house. He took a photo, emailed it to his lawyer, then calmly reinstalled his original sign. But it was a warning shot. Karen had started tampering with his property now. 2 days later, another issue. His water pressure dropped suddenly. A call to the city confirmed the line was temporarily shut off due to a maintenance request, a request filed under his address. Using his name, Ethan clenched his jaw. She was impersonating him. That night, he parked his truck at the end of the street and waited. The clock ticked past midnight before a familiar silver SUV rolled into view. Its headlights dimmed as it coasted near his driveway. Karen stepped out, flashlight in hand. She looked around cautiously, then crouched beside his planters, the 4-ton concrete beasts she'd once mocked. She tapped one with her flashlight, as if searching for a weak point. Ethan flipped on his truck's high beams. Karen froze like a raccoon caught in a dumpster. "Well," Ethan said, stepping out, "if it isn't the Queen of Compliance herself," her voice cracked. "You can't just, this isn't legal." "Neither is vandalizing private property at midnight. I'm inspecting for violations." "Sure you are." He pulled out his phone and snapped a few photos. "Smile for the city records," her face twisted in fury. "You think this is over? You embarrassed me, humiliated me in front of everyone." "I built this neighborhood!" Ethan sighed. "You built a prison with white fences. I just tore down the locks." She stepped closer, trembling with rage. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," he said. "But I'll still sleep better than you." She stormed off, muttering curses, her heels crunching against the gravel. The next morning, his phone buzzed again, this time from his lawyer. "Ethan," she said, her tone urgent, "you need to see this." Karen had filed an emergency injunction, claiming he had damaged HOA property and obstructed emergency access. But her paperwork was sloppy, and her evidence consisted of photos she'd taken during her midnight trespass, photos that clearly showed her on his land. Ethan smiled. "She just incriminated herself," his lawyer chuckled. "Exactly. We'll hold this for court." But that wasn't all. Karen, desperate to regain control, started knocking on neighbors' doors, warning them that Ethan planned to take over the whole neighborhood. Some believed her. Most didn't. One evening, Dave came by shaking his head. "She's losing it, man. She told my wife you were building toll gates." Ethan laughed. "Might not be a bad idea." "Seriously, though," Dave said, glancing around, "she's not stable. Maybe watch your back." Ethan nodded. "I already am." Later that week, when he returned home from a job, he found something even more alarming, a letter taped to his front door. It wasn't official. It wasn't even signed. Just a single sheet of paper with block letters scrawled across it, "Sell the street back or you'll regret it." No signature, no name, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Ethan took a long breath, folded the note, and walked straight to the police station. He filed a report for harassment and trespassing, attaching every photo, video, and message. The officer glanced through the evidence and nodded. "We'll take it from here, Mr. Grant. You've got enough here to press charges if it keeps up." That night, as rain started to fall, Ethan sat by the window watching droplets roll down the glass. The planters outside glistened under the streetlights, immovable sentinels guarding his property. He wasn't angry anymore. Just tired of the games, tired of the noise. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over until Karen's power finally collapsed in full daylight, in front of everyone she'd ever tried to control, and soon, she'd give him that opportunity herself. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with whispers and tension. Cameras flashed, and I could see Karen at the front table, her lipstick smudged and eyes wild with exhaustion. She'd spent weeks trying to twist the narrative, claiming the HOA had acted in good faith. But now, with the city records and the deed in my hand, her little empire was crumbling. My attorney stood tall beside me. "Your Honor," he said, voice firm, "my client, Mr. Blake Harrison, owns the private street known as Sycamore Lane. The HOA has illegally collected dues, issued fines, and restricted access to property they do not own." Karen shot to her feet. "That's a lie!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "He can't just—" The judge's gavel slammed down. "Sit down, Miss Henderson," he barked. "You've had your chance to speak. The evidence is clear. I didn't need to gloat. The documents spoke louder than I ever could." When the ruling came, the judge's words were final and heavy. The HOA acted beyond its authority. All fines are void. Damages will be awarded to the plaintiff. Ownership of the street remains with Mr. Harrison. Karen's face drained of color. The board members behind her looked ready to vanish into thin air. The same people who once called me a nuisance to the community were now begging their lawyers for mercy. A week later, trucks rolled in to remove the no parking and HOA property signs. Neighbors came by one after another, shaking my hand, some sheepishly apologizing for not standing up earlier. Karen, she quietly moved out a month later, her name now a local punchline whispered at backyard barbecues. I stood by my truck that evening, the same one they'd tried to ban, the sun gleaming off its hood. I placed one hand on the new street sign, private road, owned and maintained by B. Harrison. Every time the HOA mailed their rent check, I'd smile, thinking how poetic it was. They'd tried to control me with power they never had, and now they were literally paying to drive past my front gate. Sometimes revenge doesn't need to be loud or cruel. It just needs to be justified, and written in ink they can't erase. If you enjoyed seeing Ethan Cole turn the tables on the HOA, make sure to like, share, and drop a comment below. It's proof that patience and intelligence can bring down even the most arrogant powers. In the end, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply collects rent.